Warframe is a complex game, especially if you just started, it can be very intimidating. So, you might be wondering, which Warframes are good as a beginner? And if that's the case, then this video is for you. Because today, I'm going to show you 5 Warframes that are very strong and helpful, easy to access in the early game, and of course, I'm also going to show you builds for all of them. Let's go! First of all, let's talk about the 3 starter frames, Mag, Vault, and Excalibur, out of which you have to pick one at the very start of the game. My personal recommendation here in big 2025 going into 2026 would be Vault. Just to be clear, I'm not saying the other 2 are bad, and regardless of which choice you made here, you will always be able to farm the other 2 anyway, but I just think that Vault in general is an amazing and super versatile Warframe who can be useful in many different scenarios, and every account sooner or later should have a copy of him. So, if you're about to jump into the game for the first time, you might as well pick him as your starter. See, the reason why I like him so much is that he just has a little bit of everything, which makes him very useful across the game. With his first ability, you can shock multiple enemies, which is pretty good in the very low levels because the damage is enough to basically one-shot them. But even later on, there will be an augment which allows you to use this to put electricity damage on all your weapons. This is a great tool and super useful for many builds and synergies. His second ability, Speed, does exactly what the name would suggest. It makes you faster in the sense that you run faster, you reload faster, and also your melee attack speed will be amplified. This is a great tool overall because it means you can finish missions faster with your movement speed, and also for melees, which is a very strong weapon class in the early game, it's amazing because you basically get free attack speed. However, if you're more in a defensive scenario, you can use your third ability, Electric Shield. With this, you can put shields down on the field which block enemy fire, perfect for solo defense missions, or you could also just pick them up and bring them with you. That will then block all the incoming fire from the front, and it will even buff up your weapons when you shoot back through the shield. And then finally his 4 is his Big Bada Boom ultimate. Especially in the early game, this is very powerful. You tap it and you basically delete everybody around you. So yeah, long story short, Vault is great, versatile, super useful in many scenarios all the way into end game. If you haven't started the game yet, then you can choose him as your beginner Warframe, but if you already chose someone else, don't worry, it's pretty easy to get him too, because his blueprints can just be acquired from the Tenno lab in the clan dojo. This right here would be an early game example build. For Vault, it makes sense to focus on a little bit of everything, because his setup is so versatile. Up next, we need to talk about, of course, the man, the legend, the eternal new player's favorite, Rhino. Rhino can be acquired very early on in the game because his main blueprint and all of his components drop from the Jackal boss fight, which is the boss on Venus, that being the second planet. See, most new players see Rhino as this big invincible tank because with your second ability Iron Skin, you can effectively coat yourself in a skin of iron, which will absorb a lot of damage, and especially in lower enemy levels, it will basically make you invincible till the end of the mission. That is why many new players fall in love with him. However, it is by far not everything he can do. On top of the Iron Skin that makes him very tanky, he also has Roar as his third ability, which is the best damage bonus in the entire game. It applies to weapons, but it also applies to abilities. Now, I don't want to bore you all too much with math and damage calculations, so I'm just going to keep it surface level and simple, but the way that Roar works is, it is considered a faction damage bonus, something like Bane of Grenier for your rifle, and that means for every damage over time status effect, like for example if you inflict heat on an enemy and they start burning and take damage over time from that, these damage over time ticks become much stronger when under the influence of Roar because of a little weird quirk in the damage calculation there. Again, this is a beginner video, so I'm not going to bore you with the calculation formula and everything, just saying Roar is a very good skill. These are sort of the 2 stars of the show for Rhino, but also his 4 can be kinda nice because it is a big crowd control, it just pauses all the enemies around you, and his 1 can be a good mobility tool as well, even though many new players kinda don't really use it all too much. When it comes to the build for Rhino, you will notice that a lot of mods across these builds in the video will be similar, because for new game players there's not that much mod variety available yet. But with him, you ideally want to focus on having a decent amount of ability strength as well as armor, because the more armor you have, the stronger your iron skin will be, meaning you can tank more damage. And then also here I went with Streamline for efficiency, because your 4th ability Stomp, while being a great crowd control, it's pretty expensive to cast for what it does, so I think having some energy efficiency here definitely helps. Okay, up next we need to talk about a Warframe that is critically underrated and also available very early in the game, and that would be Gara. In fact, you can already acquire her on Earth, the very first planet. In order to get her, you need to go down to Cetus, the first open world, and first of all play the Saya's Vigil quest, which is also a story requirement, so you might as well do it rather sooner than later. That's how you get the main blueprint for her, and then the 3 component blueprints drop from the bounties in the Plains of Eidolon, which is also relatively easy to do. But now, what makes her so great? First of all, similar to Rhino, Gara is basically unkillable. With her second ability, Splinter Storm, you can get up to 90% damage reduction, making her very tanky. This skill also deals damage to enemies around you, but I kind of feel that this playstyle is a bit more energy intensive and not as important for new players. Then her third ability, Spectrage, distracts enemies, which is kinda nice, and it also has an augment with which you can recharge your energy when taking out these distracted enemies. Her fourth ability, Mass Vitrify, creates a ring of glass, which is perfect in defense missions. You can just stand on top of the target, cast this skill, and enemies are blocked from getting to it, the shots are blocked, and overall it just makes it much easier to play solo defense type missions with her. However, especially as a new player, the star of the show with Gara for you will probably be her first ability, Shattered Lash, because this one is one of the most powerful exalted weapons in the game. When you tap the skill, you will essentially swipe over the screen with a glass blade that deletes everything in front of you, and it even goes through walls. This skill is incredibly powerful, it deals a lot of damage even in late game, and it is super fun to play. This right here would be an example build for Gara with easy to acquire mods, plus this right here is a build for Shattered Lash. Just keep in mind that as you unlock new melee mods, also this one here is going to change. Up next, we're going to talk about another lady which turns out to be an absolute powerhouse and acquirable pretty early on, and that would be Citrine. Now, in order to get Citrine, you need to play the Mirror Defense mission Tiana Pass on Mars. There, you will have all her blueprints as potential mission drops. I should say the farm for her is pretty tedious, it does take a lot of time to get it, so alternatively you can also take the Belric and Rania crystal fragments that you get from this mission and go to Otak on Deimos, where you can exchange those for the blueprints if you didn't get them as drops from the mission directly. Still gonna take a while to get her, but I believe it is worth it. See, Citrine is just incredibly crazy because she does so many great things at the same time. You can literally play her in endgame with just one single mod because that is how powerful her base kit is just by itself. With your first ability, you throw out glass shards at enemies. The enemies then have a marker over their heads, and when you take them out, they have an increased chance of dropping health and energy orbs. This is perfect for both survival and your energy economy, because nowadays everybody gets the mod Equilibrium for free after finishing the tutorial, and Equilibrium can turn all those health drops into additional energy for you, so Citrine pretty much never runs out of energy. Then, similar to Gara, also Citrine is very tanky with her second ability, giving you up to 90% damage reduction as well, so also with Citrine, you're likely never gonna die. Her third ability, Prismatic Gem, this one is cool because it applies the 4 base elements, heat, cold, electricity, and toxin, to enemies in an area around you that you're attacking. And then finally, her ultimate, Crystallize. I'm personally not too big of a fan of it, but it is undoubtedly an absolute powerhouse for new players because it will not only stun enemies around you, but it will also make it that there are crystals growing out of their bodies, and if you hit the crystals, then you're gonna get a guaranteed red crit on that enemy, which is pretty cool for new players because especially early on, weapons don't really have that great of a crit characteristic yet, so if you can just force a tier 3 crit on the enemy with an ability, I would say that is definitely a good thing. Let's also talk about modding her, and here, really the only mandatory mod that you really need on her is Equilibrium to turn her health drops into more energy, and that will already be enough to blitz through the entire story. Of course though, more ability strength and more duration and more health and more armor for survivability can never hurt. And last, but definitely not least, we also need to talk about Kome, and this one is gonna be a bit of a contested and weird take. So let me explain what I mean here. First of all, Kome is in a bit of a weird spot in the sense that on the one hand, she definitely is a beginner frame because you can farm her on Earth with purely Earth materials very early on in the game, but then on the other hand, her entire kit is sort of designed in a way that is very counterintuitive for new players to get into. See, the special thing about Kome is that pretty much everything about her is completely randomized. That's her gimmick. Everything is a dice roll. Her passive gives you random buffs to your weapons that you have no control over. A lot of her abilities apply random status effects to enemies, and what that means is it's pretty much impossible to actually build her. This, on the one hand, can be pretty bad for new players, because if you're new and you want to get into the modding system, you try to learn it, you try to wrap your head around what's good and what's bad, then Kome is going to be a complete nightmare for you, because there is just no real building her, even not in the endgame. It's all about randomization. However, on the other hand, if you're a pure casual, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, I'm just saying if you're, let's say, married, 45, 2 children, stressful job, and you have 2 hours a week to play a video game, in that case, I think Kome could actually be a lot of chaotic fun because of the very fact that everything is randomized and you don't actually need to understand the whole modding behind it. You can just play her and have chaotic fun with her. So with all of that being said, you kind of sort of gotta decide for yourself whether Kome is for you or rather not. In case you want to get her, all you need to do is finish the Saya's Vigil quest, the one that unlocks Gara that we previously talked about, and then there will be a new game mode on Earth called Shrine Defense. In this mission, you can get her blueprints as drops, but you also get a special resource called Fate Pearls, which you can exchange on the Cetus Shrine for those blueprints if you got unlucky with the drops. And let's also blitz over her abilities real quick. Her first creates an AoE full of lines, and enemies when they run into them get random status effects. Her second ability will occasionally give you a random challenge in the mission, which will then bestow you with a random constant buff for the rest of the mission. This one is pretty bad if you run a quick mission, but if you stay long in a mission, then those buffs stack up and can make you really freaking powerful. Your 3 is kind of your defensive tool. It can negate damage occasionally. And then your 4 is relatively similar to your 1. It also hits enemies in an AoE, but it kind of stuns them and also applies random status effects to them. This right here would be an example build that I run on her, but keep in mind, the only things that you can really mod for with her is more survivability and a bit of energy economy with Equilibrium. The rest of her power just comes from the randomization. And if you also want to know how to become super OP early on, 4 times the damage, infinite energy, and so on and so forth, then check out this video right here next. Hope to see you in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.